I am 86 years old, and this year has taught me that silence can rot a man from the inside. Before my hands fail and my breath shortens for good, I need to tell you what happened by the Elkstone River in the spring of 1983. I was younger then, strong enough to work nights at the mill, foolish enough to believe secrets could be buried like old tools. I lived alone near the tree line, close enough to hear the river even in my sleep, and I helped watch a neighbor's child when her mother worked double shifts in town. The girl was 7, all elbows and stubborn hope, with a habit of talking to animals as if they listened. She followed me everywhere, asking questions about clouds, knives, and why rivers never froze evenly. I told her the Elkstone was dangerous, that it looked calm only because it was patient. She nodded, never really listening, because children think warnings are stories meant for someone else. That river had a presence. In winter it hissed under ice like a trapped thing. In spring it grew heavy and fast, swollen with mountain snow, dragging whole trees downstream as if they weighed nothing. On the morning everything changed. The air smelled of rust and wet pine. Fog hung low, and the water slapped the banks with a dull, hungry rhythm. I remember thinking it sounded louder than usual, like it was calling. She was down near the bend where the rocks formed a shallow shelf, tossing sticks and naming them boats. I told her to stay where I could see her. Then I turned away for a moment, just long enough to stack firewood and wipe sap from my hands. I heard a sharp splash, a cry cut short, and then nothing but water. When I reached the bank, the river was already pulling her under. Her small arms broke the surface once, fingers spread, eyes wide with shock rather than fear. I ran in without thinking, boots filling, cold biting like knives. The current slammed into me, spun me sideways, and tore her from my grasp as easily as breath leaves a dying man. I remember her red jacket flashing once, then vanishing into gray foam. I screamed her name until my throat burned. The river answered by taking more. I stumbled back onto the bank, soaked and shaking, knowing with terrible clarity that I was about to watch a child die. That was when the water bulged unnaturally upstream, rising in a way that made no sense. Something dark moved against the current, tall and solid, parting the river like a living wall. At first my mind refused it. I thought it was a fallen tree, or grief breaking my sight. Then an arm emerged, thicker than a log, wrapped around the girl's small body with careful strength. The shape lifted her from the river as if weight meant nothing, cradling her head above the foam. It stepped onto the rocks, towering, soaked, breathing hard, and for a heartbeat we all existed together in silence. Its eyes met mine. There was no rage in them, no triumph, only a focused urgency that told me this was not a miracle meant to be seen. It placed the girl gently on the stones, pressed 2 massive fingers against her chest until she coughed water and began to breathe. Then it backed away toward the trees, moving with a grace that contradicted its size. I held her shaking body, sobbing into her hair, while the forest swallowed the thing that had saved her. Sirens came later. Questions followed. I told them she slipped and I pulled her out. I did not tell the truth. I could not. Standing there, soaked and trembling, I understood something I would spend a lifetime protecting. The river had taken everything from me that morning, and then, impossibly, it had given something back. I did not know then how heavy that gift would become, or how deeply that would root itself in my bones. Saving her life cost me my peace, my sleep, and every easy truth I once believed. From that day forward I listened for footsteps that were not human, watched the trees for shapes that should not exist, and measured my words with care. I learned that gratitude can be terrifying, that protection sometimes means silence, and that witnessing mercy can fracture a man. As I carried her home through the fog, I felt eyes on my back and understood I had crossed a line that could never be uncrossed. The river still roared behind us, but something else watched, waiting, and I knew our lives had already been quietly divided forever. That truth followed me onward, patient and silent, into every remaining year. The year after the river, the girl did not return to us the way a child should. Her body healed quickly, but something in her had shifted, sliding sideways like a shadow at dusk. She stopped sleeping through the night and began waking before dawn, standing barefoot on the porch as if listening for instructions only she could hear. When I asked what she was waiting for, she said nothing, just tilted her head toward the trees, eyes calm in a way that frightened me. Doctors said shock could do strange things. They spoke in gentle tones about trauma and memory, about how children rearrange fear into quiet habits. Yet she grew stronger, not weaker. She ate less but moved more, climbing hills without breath, carrying wood heavier than her small frame should allow. Her hands lost their softness, skin toughened by cold, and her eyes learned to read the world without asking permission. I watched this change with a tightening chest, knowing it did not belong to medicine. By summer she began slipping away for hours at a time. She would vanish into the forest without sound, leaving behind folded clothes and careful footprints that led nowhere. Search parties formed twice, then stopped when she returned on her own, clean and uninjured, smelling of rain and pine. When questioned, she offered only fragments. She spoke of paths that were not paths, of silence that felt like safety, and of someone tall who taught her where not to step. I followed once, moving slow, keeping the wind in my favor like a hunter taught me long ago. The forest swallowed her easily, but it did not swallow me. I saw the broken ferns, the stones turned just enough to mark passage, the careful intelligence in how she moved. Near a ravine, I felt the pressure again, that sense of being weighed and measured. The trees ahead breathed differently, and I knew I was no longer alone. He did not hide from me. He stood across the clearing, vast and still, sunlight caught in dark hair matted by age and weather. His face held scars, pale lines crossing deep-set eyes that watched me without hatred. The girl stepped from behind him, rested a hand against his leg like a promise. In that moment I understood she had not been taken. She had been chosen, and she had agreed. That summer became a lesson in restraint. I did not tell anyone what I had seen. I learned when to look away and when to pretend ignorance. The girl split her days between us and the forest, moving between worlds with a grace that made me feel clumsy and old. She learned to track water under stone, to feel storms before clouds gathered, to hide her scent with crushed leaves and ash. I noticed marks on her arms, not bruises but impressions from bark and rope, signs of training rather than harm. She carried herself differently, shoulders back, chin lifted, as if balance itself had been taught to her. When I asked if she was afraid, she shook her head. "He watches," she said simply, and in her voice was the certainty of someone who had never been abandoned. Late that year, black trucks began crawling the logging roads. Men with clean boots asked questions about wildlife and missing livestock. Helicopters cut the sky, their blades chopping the quiet into nervous pieces. The forest changed its tone, and so did he. I saw him only once more that season, farther back, wounded along the flank, blood dark against bark. He watched the girl from a distance, and for the first time I saw fear in him. When winter came early, she stayed with us more, restless and silent, as if listening for a call held just out of reach. The trucks left, but the damage lingered. Trees were marked, trails mapped, and the air felt thinner, less forgiving. I realized then that the year had not stolen her from us. It had returned her altered, bound by a loyalty that would someday demand a price. And as snow buried the path she once followed, I knew whatever waited ahead would test every promise I had made in silence. The years that followed did not arrive gently. They stacked themselves one atop another like cut timber, heavy and unavoidable. The girl grew, season by season, into someone who carried both worlds in her posture. By the time she turned 10, she could outwalk men twice her size, moving over scree and root with a confidence learned from watching something older than fear. I aged alongside her, my joints stiffening, my hair thinning, my patience sharpening into something quieter and more deliberate. He remained at the edge of our lives, never crossing fully into them, never leaving entirely. I would sense him before I saw him, a shift in birdsong, a pressure in the chest that felt like being observed by the land itself. Sometimes he appeared only as a silhouette against dusk, sometimes close enough that I could hear his breath rasping through old lungs. He never spoke, but communication happened all the same, in stillness and careful distance. We developed routines without discussing them. The girl left food where it would be found and took nothing without permission. I treated wounds when I was allowed, cleaning deep cuts with boiled water and ash, stitching thick skin with fishing line while he endured it without sound. In those moments, trust passed between us like a living thing, fragile and sacred. I learned the weight of his arm, the heat of his blood, and the restraint it took for him not to flinch. Time taught us all its lessons. Logging roads pushed deeper into the mountains, carving scars that never healed. Winters grew harsher, summers drier. The girl learned to read these changes as warnings, and I learned to listen when she spoke quietly of danger. We became a family of sorts, bound not by names or law but by shared risk and shared silence. Every meal tasted of what we did not say. There were close calls. Hunters wandered too far, drawn by rumors and boredom. Once, a drone buzzed low over the canopy, its whine slicing the air. He moved then with a speed that stole my breath, drawing attention away from the girl, crashing through brush like a storm. I understood in that instant that protection was his language, and sacrifice its grammar. He returned hours later, bleeding and limping, but alive. As the girl entered her teens, she balanced between futures. She learned to read books and people, to soften her voice in town and sharpen it in the woods. She carried knowledge that could not be shared, and it weighed on her shoulders. Sometimes she asked what would happen when I was gone. I told her the truth I could manage, that love does not vanish, it changes shape. I did not tell her how afraid I was. Age crept up on him as well. His movements slowed, his breathing deepened into a labor. Scars multiplied, stories written in flesh. One winter, an infection took hold after a snare cut his leg. I stayed with him for days, feeding broth and holding pressure, praying to nothing I believed in. When fever finally broke, relief left me shaking, aware of how close loss had come. We marked time differently then. Birthdays were quiet acknowledgments. Anniversaries of storms and near disasters replaced holidays. The forest became both home and hospital, sanctuary and threat. I began to feel my own limits, the way cold settled deeper into bone, the way fatigue lingered. The girl noticed and adjusted, taking on more, watching me with the same care she gave him. The balance held longer than I expected, stretched thin but unbroken. Yet beneath every shared moment ran an undercurrent of inevitability. I could feel the world pressing closer, louder, more curious. Secrets do not age well, they grow restless. As the girl stepped toward adulthood and he receded further into shadow, I sensed the approach of a reckoning none of us could outrun. Love had bound us together, but love would not be enough to stop what was coming. The last winter came early and refused to leave. Snow arrived in October, heavy and wet, bending branches until they cracked like old bones. He stopped coming to the clearing then, and the absence felt louder than his footsteps ever had. The girl, grown now, read the signs before I did, packing food, blankets, and medicine with the calm focus of someone who already understood how endings announce themselves long before they arrive. We found him near the ridge where the wind never rested. He lay against a fallen cedar, chest rising in shallow pulls, breath frosting the air in uneven bursts. His eyes followed us, alert but tired, and when he tried to stand his legs betrayed him without apology. I knelt beside him, pressing my forehead to his, feeling the heat fading through thick hair, knowing there would be no leaving this place together once the mountain had made its decision. The storm arrived without warning, a white wall swallowing distance and sound. We built a shelter from branches and canvas, our hands numb and clumsy, working by instinct and memory while daylight vanished. All night the wind screamed, and he shuddered with fever as I fed him broth and whispered thanks he could never answer. The girl sang softly, a low hum learned long ago, and for a moment the world felt held, as if mercy still existed. By morning the fever broke, but something else had given way. He watched the trees as if counting them, his breathing slowing, each rise of his chest a deliberate choice. I felt the promise settle into me then, heavy and unavoidable, shaped by every silent year we had shared. I would not call for help. I would not trade his life for proof. Whatever happened here would remain here, carried only by those who loved him enough to let him go unseen. When the end came it was gentle, almost kind. He reached out, one massive hand closing around my wrist with surprising strength that lingered just long enough to be remembered. In his eyes I saw recognition, gratitude, and a release that hurt more than fear ever had. The girl pressed her palm to his heart, steady until it wasn't, and the forest fell into a silence so complete it rang inside my skull. We stayed until the light changed, until snow covered what we could not bury and wind erased the last clear signs of his passing. By dusk there was nothing left but broken branches and the sense of being watched by memory itself, a presence that did not threaten but witnessed. We walked away without looking back, carrying a grief that felt older than either of us, a bond severed yet unbroken in its shape. Years have passed since that winter, and the world has grown louder, crueler, less patient with mystery and restraint. The girl built a life that keeps her moving, never staying long enough to be trapped by questions she cannot answer. I kept my promise, swallowing doubt and lies, letting time grind the truth into something survivable. Now, as my own breath shortens and snow returns to my dreams, I speak at last. He saved a child, and in doing so taught us how to love without being seen. That is the secret I kept, and the reason the silence finally loosens its grip. Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.